Good morning, everyone. Good morning. And good morning to our guest speaker, Mr. Jonathan Moore, and our creative writing students of 2014, and the UCRIDA Department of English students of batch 2015 and 2016. So welcome to new English Literature Post-Colonial Studies workshop. Before we start our workshop, it is wise for all of us to start with a prayer. So I will lead the prayer. Good morning, Lord Jesus. Thank you for your blessings that we can gather together here. Now we are going to start our workshop. Please bless our guest lecturer and all of the students of this workshop, so this workshop will begin well and ends well. In the name of Jesus, we pray. Amen. So today we have the honor to welcome Mr. Jonathan Moore, who has specially traveled from Salatiga to give a lecture and a workshop on post-colonial literature. We wish that Mr. Moore could further ignite the students' interest in post-colonial studies. Our students have the special position of growing up in a previously colonized country, let's say the very, and studying English literature, that is the literature of the center. They are, so to speak, in the same position as Chinua Achebe before them, who nowadays is heralded as the father of modern African literature. As we know, post-colonial literature is very important, as it attempts through narration to restore pride in the cultures of previously colonized countries that were repressed, even degraded under colonialism. As English literature from Indonesia, it is partly their responsibilities to help restore the lost connection between indigenous people and their surroundings through literature. This is one of the reasons why the creative writing students are preparing a website this term, which is Storybook website, to promote post-colonial and transcultural literature. We hope that Mr. Moore, with his working experience in Africa, could share his much-needed knowledge in post-colonial studies, our aspiring writers or teacher and translator in the next 6 hours. Thank you. Thank you, Patricia, for the welcome speech. Due to accreditation visit, our head of program, Ms. Ignas, and our dean, Professor Johanna, and our lecturer, Ms. Sylvia, are unable to join this workshop, but Ms. Sylvia will attempt to come at lunch. So the creative writing students of 2014 have made a website. The title is UCRIDA Department of English Storybook. This website will be introduced and explained by Patricia Margareta, who is the editor-in-chief of this website. So please welcome Patricia. So hello everyone. So this is the Storybook UDE website that creative writing students of 2014 have made and developed. We have been working also with the PTIK students, which is the Technology Information students, to help us with the design and the layout of the website, because we cannot, and while we're in charge of the contents. So the purpose of the website is actually to facilitate students, especially UCRIDA Department of English students, to share their thoughts, their opinion, and creativity in the writing form. So, if you visit the website, this is the appearance, and the theme of this semester is transcultural literature, as I said before. So if you chance yourself to visit the website, you can see all written works about transcultural literature. You can click the read and transcultural literature, and there will be entries about post-colonial literature. Transcultural literature, like this. If you want to see the, if you want to see the most recent entries, you can see on these sections. If you want to see the newest events, you can see on that sections. Lastly, we have a new event. So this event gives an opportunity to students, especially Ukrainian Department of English students, to share their creativities through writing about transcultural literature, whether it is in the form of article, review, or even short story fiction. So if you are interested to contribute in this event, you can visit the website, or for further information, you can contact the person in charge. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Patricia. So the creative writing students of 2014 have made transcultural short stories, and now we have two of the creative writing batch 2014 students to present their story. Firstly, please welcome Daisy Adeska. Okay. So my name is Daisy, as you know already, and my story titled Food, and it is written for Mr. Vincent, and I will present it to you, and it is contained transculture. Okay, so the story told about a family which have two sons and they are twins. So the first one is Biming and the second one is Bowen. Okay, so actually the name Biming is Chinese name, and it means clear, which is present the Chinese Indonesian people, which is have bright skin. And Bawana is Japanese name, and it is mean world, and this Bawana represent Indonesia that dominated with pribumi. Okay, so actually the mother likes Biming more, and the father likes Bawana more, and there is no balance in their family. Like the mother always give more food to Biming rather than Bawana, and the fathers always like Bawana rather than Biming. And one day, in history class, the teachers talk about when Indonesia is colonized, and actually she said that why Indonesian people always fight against each other because they are monopolized, and that is why Indonesian people actually have to be united. And in this story also, Biming and Bawana always fight against each other. They want to be the best out of the best, while this class actually knocks some sense to them, and they are like peaceful at the moment, but when they are home, the fight happen again, and the mother also the father fought each other because they think that the others is unfair. Like the mother told the father that you are unfair because you like Bawana more and vice versa. And then in the end, this family is separated. The mother takes Biming and the father stay at home with Bawana. So the message actually in this story the message of this story actually we need to be united. Now because we are brothers, we are sisters, so either because of our different race or ethnic or religion, actually we are brothers and we have to be united. So that's my story. Thank you.
Thank you, Daisy. Now, let us welcome the second student who will present his story, Othniel Romeo.
The main character of this story is a girl named Bella, and Bella is of Chinese Indonesian descent, and she's also a Christian. So since she's in the 12th grade of senior high school, she is still a teenager, and she joined in the youth community of her church, and she serves as a singer. One day she met a guy, she meets a guy named Monang, hence his name, he is Bataknis, and as time goes by, they fall in love with each other, and Bella was so impressed because Monang is very different, and he's so not like any other Batak stereotypes, which in the story I said that most people think that Bataknis people are rude, or they are mean, or they are grumpy or something else. But Monang is different, so Bella is impressed because of that. And after Bella graduates from high school, she studies in the same university as Monang, and she also took the same study program, which is economic management. And then they secretly are in a relationship without Bella's parents knowing about it, because Bella's parents never allow their daughter to date or be in a relationship with a guy who is not of Chinese descent, because Bella's father especially he has a bad or frightening experience, because during the May 1998 riots of Indonesia, his store was being destroyed, and his parents, who are Bella's paternal grandparents, were killed during that time. And then after Bella's parents know about their relationship, so Bella tell them, Bella's father gets really mad, and he said that why are you dating a Batak guy? You both become Beauty and the Beast. So they never approved their relationship, but at the end, since Bella was very confused, she prays to God to change her father's mind, until one day Bella's father gets a problem, and to finish that problem, there is someone that he didn't know, he is Bataknis, and then that person helps her father. So her father realized that we should never judge people from their ethnic backgrounds. So these are the symbolism As you know that, I think this is, all of you are familiar with the name, right? Bella means beautiful. It's an Italian word. While the other one, there's a character named David. David is actually jealous of Monang because he is in the same church youth group, and he actually likes Bella way before Monang joins the community. That's why I gave him the last name is Kurawa, just like the Kurawa in the story of Mahabharata. So the moral of this story is that we should have never judged people from their ethnic background. And the second one, since David fights with Monang, even though they are in the same church, while in the same church they are like brothers, right? They are not supposed to be fighting. Okay. This is the end of my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Neil. And now, Mr. Moore, would you be so kind to give some feedbacks either for the short stories or even the website?
Yeah. I think that today we're gonna get into a lot of these ideas, but what really I'm optimistic about is seeing that you're already getting past just speaking of post-colonialism and the idea of transculturalism. You guys aren't, when I look around the room, I can tell, but also knowing your age group and where you're coming from, you aren't just one culture. And you're moving through multiple cultures, multiple circles of cultural influences. And that's what we're seeing here. Whereas your parents might have only considered, you would never date a Bataknese, you would never do that. You're probably a little bit more open to that possibility. And the idea of going beyond your own culture or moving from one culture to another, not just geographically, not just moving physically onto another island, but still maintaining your cultural identity. But at some point in your life, a lot of you will transition culturally from one cultural group to another. Your beliefs, values, and attitudes will begin to shift and change. And that's what I'm seeing both with the stories that you guys introduced of mom and dad needing to see that that change needs to be possible. And the people involved in the external parts of the relationship not understanding how you could do this, but realizing that the heart wants what the heart wants in some of these cases. So I like the fact that you guys are playing off some eternal themes and themes that we've seen over and over again, but doing it with a focus on culture. So yeah, I'm really optimistic, especially about the website too. I'm kind of jealous thinking, how do I get my Ukana Sway students involved in this kind of stuff? So yeah, I think that you guys have a great promise there.
Thank you. It's good to meet you.
Okay, so we want to say welcome to Miss Leah, who have joined the workshop. And we are moving on for the first session of today's lecture. So let us welcome Mr. Jonathan Moore to start the first session. Please give applause.
There we go. I don't want you guys to fall asleep, but I also don't want my computer to fall asleep, so let me go and fix that. stay off mic, I will. I'm optimistic. I usually teach on Wednesdays. I teach 6 hours on Wednesdays anyway. I have 13 students who sit with me for all 6 hours. We take a lunch break and then they come back for another class and they join another 26 students. So I'm used to having a group this size, and I'll try to be loud enough. I feel like I should give you guys some background. I met Miss Sylvia a few months ago when she was visiting Salatiga, and I was speaking on why should Indonesians study African literature. And from there we got into a discussion about what you're doing here. So she's got a little bit of background about who I am and where I'm coming from, but I feel like I should let you guys know some things. I'm not Indonesian. Make that clear. I am not African. Okay? And so it's odd for me to be talking to you, Indonesians, people who were at one time at least were colonized, because you guys were colonized by people like me. And so I understand that there's an irony here, that the big white guy is going to tell you what you need to learn about being oppressed by the white guy. I want to give you guys a little bit of where I came from. I was from the Midwest. I was from the Desa in Illinois, middle of the United States. No African Americans, much less Africans, anywhere near me. We thought it was odd in my high school that we had a Catholic attending our high school. That was cultural diversity. We were white, Protestant, middle-class farming communities with some people who went to the city to do work. But when I was in college, I started falling in love with African literature. It was really bizarre. I started reading a guy named Ngugi wa Thiong'o. And he's certainly a contemporary of Chinua Achebe. And so I kind of cringe when I hear Chinua Achebe, the godfather of all African literature. Yeah, he's pretty good. But Ngugi's pretty good too. And so I began to fall in love with African literature and say, man, this is interesting, the way that people are being manipulated, and the Marxist element of this, and the control element. And how is it that someone like Britain could take a few hundred soldiers at a time and control entire countries? What was it that compelled them to do it? And how was it that with a small number of people, you could subjugate, you could oppress an entire, much larger population? And realizing it wasn't just about the size of their guns. It wasn't military might that was allowing it to, but there was cultural engineering going on. And so I approached my university and I said, I really like African literature. I want to go to Africa and study African literature. They kind of looked at me and they said, Africa's dangerous. It's scary. It's like Jakarta. It's a big, scary place, and you're going to get eaten by lions or attacked by terrorists, or something bad will happen to you. So let's send you to England, and you can study African literature from England. Or we can send you to Spain, where it's safe. And it was curious, because I was still hearing the same post-colonial, colonial mentality, which was telling me, no, I couldn't go to Africa. Those people aren't like us, is what essentially they were saying. I found a different way to do it. I ended up working in Kenya and doing irrigation work in the middle of the desert, where if you come from Jakarta, you would say, it's really hot here in Africa. It's really hot. 40, 45 degree heat. Every day we would start work as soon as there was enough light, usually by the stars. So 4 a.m., 3 a.m., we would go out and do work with irrigation until the pipes became too hot to touch the basi, to touch the metal. And then we would work probably until 6 or 7 a.m. Too hot. We'd nap throughout the day. As the sun started going down, we would go back to work. But during that dead time, during that time in which we were really just trying to find a place that the sun wasn't beating down on us, I would have these conversations about what I'd read. I'd be talking to the people of Turkana, the naked people who live up in the northern reaches near the Ethiopian border. And I talked to them about what they're experiencing and about what I read. Is any of that really true? Is that romanticized? Is that fictionalized? Tell me about your childhood. Tell me about what you're experiencing. So I ended up writing my scriptsy on Ngugi wa Thiong'o's children's literature, the Njamba Nene stories. He's only written a few of them that have been translated into English, and one or two more that are still in the original Kikuyu. And from there, I ended up moving to Africa, working in North Africa for a number of years at a university in Eritrea. If you don't know where that is, Ethiopia used to have a coastline on the Red Sea. They don't anymore. That's Eritrea. And as a colonial in a dual system, as a dually colonized country, first of all by the Italians, and then later really by the Ethiopians, by other Africans, Eritreans felt this idea of post-colonialism in a way that I think that it's hard for anyone who hasn't experienced it. You guys remember how it was when you were living with the Dutch? Do you remember that? Remember what it was like when the Dutch guys were ordering you around? You don't, because that's removed. And maybe some of you, we could talk to your father or your mother about it, but for most of you, I imagine we gotta go back beyond your parents. We've got to talk about grandparents or great-grandparents to even get an idea about what pre-colonial Indonesian culture was like. And so today I'm going to be introducing a lot of these ideas that I've been chewing on really for the last 40 years, since I was 3 or 4 years old, and my parents started introducing me to Japanese foreign exchange students, and then most of my childhood was with French foreign exchange students coming in and out of our house every few years. A lot of those ideas I've been kicking around, and even in the last few months, since I've been prepping this lecture, I think I've been going through it. I think I've got 5 different versions so far that I've been doing. What is it that we want to highlight? Especially with your website that you're working on, especially with you as Sastra and English students. How is it that we need to highlight this for you? And I get you for 6 hours. This is easily a subject that we could cover over the course of, I don't know, we could do a year. We could try to narrow it down to a semester and not get everything. We could go ahead and take a look at it for 4 years. Let's do a degree in post-colonial sastra, post-colonial literature. Or you guys can devote your full 8 years of undergraduate plus your PhD work and still not feel like you covered it all. I'm very much an African post-colonialist or neo-colonialist. I've only in the last decade, since we moved to Indonesia, begun to study the works here and get a feel for how Indonesian post-colonial, neo-colonial literature fits into the greater discussion of African, South American, North American, Greater Asian, even European colonial literature. This morning, I want to walk through things kind of quickly, just as an overview. We've got until lunchtime, and I want to talk about some things in terms of what it meant to be a colonist and how that colonialism affects what you guys are talking about now, what the goals of colonialism were and how it impacted things. We'll do a lunchtime activity, which will either be really interesting or bomb horribly. And I'm willing to see either, because sometimes a failed experiment is still a valuable experiment. But I'm going to need you guys to participate at lunch, while you're eating, and while you're talking about Manchester United, or you're talking about next week's school activities, or you're talking about that guy over there, he's really cute, I hope he comes over and talks to me. So we'll have this activity over lunch while you're doing the things that people do while they're eating their meal. We'll come back and we'll talk about lunch in Yakrut, which is where you guys will be having your lunch. And then I'm going to move on to this idea of the problem with in post-colonialism. And that's going to be an area where I don't know if we're all going to agree. I think we will, given what I've been hearing about transculturalism, but it's certainly a controversial thing. I've introduced myself and said, I don't believe in post-colonialism. And so I'll explain what that really means to me as a lecturer, as an academic, as a scholar. But for right now, I want to talk to you guys a little bit about kind of the basic tenets of post-colonialism. There we go. I want you to understand that from the very basics, I hope, and I don't know if you've done it, I know that a lot of you have read Chinua Achebe. You've read Things Fall Apart. Maybe some of you have gotten into deeper things. I'm hearing some Joseph Conrad has been talked about, and you're digging into that. But if you don't get into the scramble for Africa, if you don't read something like King Leopold's Ghost, which talks about the Belgian influence of Africa, if you don't talk about, it wasn't just a British thing, it wasn't just a French thing, it was an everything. The powers that had the money could move on to this idea. Yeah, I'm not going to need you there. Thanks. The powers that had the money and had the maps began to look at how do we use Africa? How do we go ahead and exploit this new continent? I love how the story behind Conrad, and how Conrad was once given a map as a child, and it was a map of Africa, and what he saw was the outsides of that continent were filled in. There were some city names, there were some lakes, there were some waterways that were on that map, but they only went in just a fraction into the continent. And in the middle of that continent was blackness. In the middle of that continent was emptiness. And there were talks about giant races of people. There were talks about cities of gold. There were talks about monsters and creatures that would absorb you. There was talk about Satan and an entrance to hell, depending on the stories that you heard. But the countries that began to explore Africa, they weren't exploring it just for knowledge. They weren't just saying, you know what? This is something we don't know, we need to know it. They weren't doing it just for the sake of humanity. We got this globe, and there are pieces of this globe that have black spots where we don't know what's inside of it. Instead, they started going ahead and asking, what's in it for us? And so if you're going to talk about post-colonialism, you need to understand that the colonists at first, especially by and large, there were individuals, and I don't want to condemn an entire population, there were individuals who went to Africa for idealistic reasons. There were people who came to Indonesia from the West for positive reasons, that they said, I want to help. Hi, I'm Jonathan Moore, I'm Pat Jomo. I'm here in Indonesia not to get rich, because you don't do that as a professor, and not to exploit the people. I really do think that I'm trying to be here to help as best I can. And so there were pockets of those people, but a lot of it, a lot of colonialism was founded on this basic tenet of what's in it for me. How can I benefit from this? And so it might have been things like gold and precious metals. It might have been things like the spice trade. And so if you haven't read Nathaniel's Nutmeg, which I know at least in the past has been available at Gramedia as well as the airport bookstores. If you haven't read stories like that that talk about the spice trade here in Indonesia and in the areas around it, that they were looking for resources that people wanted. And it wasn't talk about an equal exchange, because the people that they were seeing weren't equal. The people that they were encountering, the Indonesians, because they weren't really Indonesians, the Bataknis, the people in Papua, the Javanese, the different cultural groups that they were seeing, they dressed differently, and they acted differently, and they didn't know God the way that we, the Westerners, know God. And because of that, it wasn't just a matter of let's exploit the resources. Let's take advantage of what we can. We'll go to the New World, to the Americas, and we'll give them some beads, or we'll give them some lice-infested blankets in exchange for resources that we want. It wasn't just about that, but it was about exploiting human resources. What that meant for the Americas was free labor. It was about slavery. It was about the British coming to Africa, taking the Africans, trading them to the Americas, ending up with sugar getting whiskey out of the deal and bringing it back so everybody can have a big old drunken party in England at the cost of human beings. And even where slaves weren't directly taken as part of colonialism, they were seen as a cheap resource. They were seen as, we don't need to pay them the same way. We don't need to treat them the same way. We don't need to act like they're valuable and have to have the same rights as we do. So we're looking at not only people, but we're also looking at the resources themselves. We need to understand that colonialism intentionally engineers the colonized culture. I mentioned a few minutes ago that when we're talking about colonization, and I really want you guys to separate out colonization from occupation. When we talk about occupation, we're talking typically about control through force. So military occupation. The Japanese decide that they're going to come in and they're going to take physical control. If you don't agree with the Japanese, you get thrown in jail. If you create conflict, you get killed or you get controlled, you get put in leg irons. We're going to use physical might to control the people. That's what we're talking about with occupation. Occupation works really well if you have the weapons. It works really well if you've got the resources. It works really well if you're dealing with short-term occupation. But if you're talking about a long-term commitment, if you're talking about the ongoing exploitation of resources, if you're talking about how do we make this work without spending a lot of our capital, we don't want to use a lot of our people, we don't want to use a lot of our money, we don't even want to use a lot of our time, because there's money to be made elsewhere too. And so in order to go ahead and do the most you can with the fewest resources, it can't be just about military might. Eventually military might runs out of steam. That there ends up having to be a breakdown. The resources stop coming. The diseases start infecting your own soldiers. You start getting soldiers who are tired and scared or being threatened or being outnumbered, and finally the people revolt. And they stand up and they fight against the oppressors in that military-style occupation. Instead, let's do it a different way. Let's go ahead and talk about cultural engineering. And it's curious because this concept of cultural engineering really didn't come up until the 1960s, but we've been doing it throughout our whole lives. You've been doing it throughout your whole life. You manipulate people in a lot of different ways. On top of being a scholar about post-colonialism and Sastra, when I was in college, my scholarship was speech and debate. And we talked a lot about technique of public speaking in terms of control. How is it that you can control or manipulate people? And we did it to win an argument. But you do it in other ways. Why does a baby cry? Why does a baby cry? I know we're going in lots of different directions. That's how I teach. But it'll piece together, I promise. Why does a baby cry? It wants to get something. What happens if it cries and you get it for him the first time? What does the baby learn? Cry, get something. I have a 6-year-old daughter who's actually here in Jakarta visiting with us right now. They're off seeing the zoo. And my 6-year-old daughter, when she was little, her favorite activity was, let me take this object from my chair and throw it on the floor. Because what's going to happen? Mom or Dad is going to come along and pick it up. And then I throw it over here. And Mom or Dad walks over to it and picks it up. Right? Really at the age of like 3 or 4 months, My daughter was learning manipulation techniques. She's learning about control. I have students right now that I'm really grateful. I have students right now that I've had for 7 or 8 classes in their 3 or 4 years at Fast Web. And it's great because they quickly learn what works and what doesn't work to control the docent. So if they want to get out early from class, if they want to have an easier assignment, if they want to do something that's going to make their lives a little bit better, they've learned that crying doesn't work, bad argument doesn't work, and being shy doesn't work. Mr. Moore, oh, I don't want to, I don't know how to say this here. But instead they've learned the most effective reaction is to adjust their cultural perceptions and to adjust their cultural behaviors and to talk to me using my cultural values. And my cultural values are directness and honesty. Mr. Moore, we are tired. We just sat through this other instructor. You know that instructor that's really mean. We just sat through their class. He's just given us a horribly long assignment. We can do your assignment, Mr. Moore, but we're not going to do a good job because we're tired. Or you can give us an extra week to do the assignment. That's logical. That works for me. I want a good assignment, and I want you to be honest about why it is that you don't think you can do a good assignment on time. Okay, let's play with that. And so my students are understanding that they needed to adjust to my cultural values. And that's great. They've adjusted to me, the oppressor. They've adjusted to the docent's oppressive rule and figured out what works for them. What the British, especially in East Africa, so we're talking about Kenya, Tanzania, and different places that they occupy. What they did really well and really effectively was learned to engineer the culture so that the Kenyans, so that the Africans would see that they want to be like the oppressors. They want to be more British. And there's profit for the Africans that are willing to submit to authority and to act more British and to behave in the British way. That there's benefit to that. When we talk about motivation, we talk about motivation as being carrot or stick. You can motivate someone by beating them. You can motivate someone by threatening them. If you don't do what I ask, you will fail my class. That's a stick motivation. That I'm going to beat you down. I can tell you, if you fail my class, oh, this was a great example. My students in Eritrea. Eritrea has mandatory national service. At the age of 18, you have 2 options. You either join the university, and at the time they only had 1 university. Now they have none. But at the time, the country of Eritrea had 1 university. You either join the university at the age of 18, or you join the military. And the military is not a glamorous field. We're talking about building roads by hand. We're talking about taking the mountains and building steps on the mountains for rice fields or for growing plots, and doing that by hand. We're talking about going to the Danakil Depression, one of the hottest places on the planet, and doing military training all day in the hot sun. So a lot of students want to go to university because that's your option. University or that. If you fail out of university, what happens to you? You go into the military. And if you're lucky, you're digging ditches by hand. If you're unlucky, you're going to the front lines of Ethiopia and you're fighting the Ethiopians. And maybe, if you're really lucky and you're stuck in the front lines, they give you a gun. And that gun has bullets. Because a lot of the guns that they gave away didn't have bullets. It's a stick mentality. It's a stick mentality of, here's the threat that we're going to put in front of you. What I like to do with my students is to focus on the positive. If you do well, you're going to be rewarded, not just with a high GPA. You're not just going to be rewarded because you're going to be able to get a gold star that says, I'm smart. But instead, pointing out the fact that students who do well at university typically get better jobs. Students who graduate from university alone, you have more opportunities. You have choices that you can make about what you want to do with your life. When you're done here in the next few years, you can decide, do I go on for graduate school? Do I find a job? Do I just decide I'm going to get married? And that's fine too. But you now have options about working, where you work, how you work, what kind of jobs you take, what universities you go to. Colonialism, when it works, used this carrot mentality of attracting people to it, to follow the way. And they did it through business. If you were willing to help the British make money, you were given a position of authority. The more money you made, the more money you were given, the more authority you were given, the higher your position was. In India, that may mean becoming a Raja, that may mean becoming essentially a prince of a region. In Indonesia, that meant being either given control of certain businesses, or even be given positions of government offices. And so yeah, the British were in control, but you were the top Indonesian, or you were the top Kenyan, or you were the best of it, and you got that prestige. Maybe you got a jacket, and that jacket had little epaulets on the side of it. Maybe you got a special office, in which this was your office. And so in business, they used that. In government, they began to change the way that government was done. And they said that if you're going to follow the ways of the old government, maybe a tribal council, no, we're going to throw that away. So the old chiefs, the old village leaders, that we're done with that. But we're going to tell you about this is the right way to run a government. So we're going to show you that this is how it's done. It's not done around a campfire because there's a full moon. It's not done using the oldest person in the village because they're the smartest. They've experienced the most. Instead, it's going to be done this way because this is the civilized way. This is the right way to do it. Powdered wigs, long robes. We're going to go ahead and stair-step the classrooms. We're going to have what Hofstede, I don't know if you've studied much with culture, but Hofstede's cultural dimensions, one of his cultural dimensions that he talks about is power distance. And establishing a stratified power distance like the Javanese have in your language, with the multiple forms of it, except we're going to do that with government. So that we have the most powerful, and we have the less powerful, and if you obey the British rule, we'll move you up, and if you don't, we'll move you down. And so we're going to manipulate our idea of government. The classroom setting that you got here. This is the right way to be educated. You are educated properly. If there is a teacher, a docent, a guru, I love that word, because it makes it sound spiritual. The guru. You've got a person of authority, and I'm smart, and you listen to me because I'm smart, and you're not. And the education is going to go this direction. By the way, if my sarcasm doesn't translate, you've got to let me know. Because I hope you guys understand that that's not my mentality. But from the British idea of we have one person who is educating you. And it's not the other way around. It's not that I can learn a ton from you because I'm an outsider to Indonesia. It's not that I should be learning a lot from you because my Indonesian is really, really bad, even after a decade of living here. It's because I have the lighter skin, I'm the white culture, I'm from the West, and therefore I must be smart. That's the way that the British are teaching people. And so, even when you look at Chinua Achebe's schooling, if you look at Ngugi's history, about how they grew up in the different school systems that were set up either through mission schools or through government schools, the way that they grew up was being conditioned that there's a right way to educate and there's a wrong way to educate. And you can't teach in the shadows of the palm leaves down by the river where it's cool. You need to teach in a classroom where the students are wearing uniforms and everybody has a pair of shoes. There's a right way to educate and a wrong way to educate. This is going to get me in trouble here, and I want to make it clear, I don't hesitate to share my faith. I'm a Christian. Not a lowercase k. I'm a big capital K, not a kate K Christian. I'm a Christian. And so if you hear me criticize the church, I don't want you guys to think that I'm criticizing God's church. I'm criticizing the way that the British were using their churches at the time. There were a lot of, again, exceptions to this rule. There were great missionaries out there who were having real positive impact. But at the same time, we would be blind to not acknowledge the fact that the church was a tool for imperialism. That the church was a way to convince people. In the Americas, one of the things that the church sometimes was used as was justification for slavery. If we talk about the tribe that was excluded, if we talk about slavery as seen in the Old Testament, if we talk about slaves, you need to obey your masters. In the Americas, we often talked about the fact that it was manifest destiny. I don't know if you've heard that expression before. Manifest destiny. It is God's will that the British, that the Americans, that the white faces control all of North America. God ordained it. We reframed the argument from the Jews being given the promised land, and we said the whole world, you can call it the Great Commission, you can call it manifest destiny. You can use a lot of different logical reasonings for it and throw it into a biblical terminology, but it all came down to God wants the West to civilize the rest of the world. You don't know God? You gotta know God. If you don't know God, you're going to hell. And so me telling other people about Jesus is a good thing. And if I have to beat you for you to admit that you are now a Christian, if I have to bloody you up to make you into a Christian, the colonial mentality sometimes said that was enough. That was okay. There's another term, rice Christians. I don't know if you know that term or not. With rice Christians, one of the criticisms about the church has been church groups that will give you food if you come to church. So you come to church, and I'm going to go, oh boy, I don't even know if I should share this story because I know I'm being videotaped. There's a story, and it may be anecdotal. It may be a story that's been made up and passed around, so let me say it that way so it doesn't sound like I'm blaming it. There was a church that once gave out angel wings to each of the children who would come to church. Little wings to attach on their back, kind of like butterflies. What little girl doesn't want to look like a butterfly or a pretty bird or an angel? The way that I've heard this particular story, and again, I want to make sure that you guys understand this could be exaggerated, this could be made up. But the way that I remember hearing this particular story was all the little girls in the town came to that church and attended church for the required amount of time. I don't know if it was one Sunday, or if it was a vacation Bible school, or if it was a full baptism. But all the little girls came to that church in order to get their angel wings. And they all ended up leaving with angel wings. And then when they went out, the people of the village said, the church has already killed our children. Because when they came out, thinking about the fact that this is a predecessor for heaven, that this is before they end up being sent to heaven. And so it doesn't always work. But the church using food to say, if you will be converted, if you will come to us, or I'll only hire you, or you can only work for me if you are a Christian. It's cultural manipulation. It's cultural engineering. How do we effectively get people to think like us? We can threaten them, or we can provide them the promise of something more. And the church does it both ways. If you don't believe you're going to hell, if you do believe you're going to live in paradise. And I don't want you guys to think that I think that this is necessarily a wrong thing. People need to be persuaded. People should be taught. But we need to be careful about why we're teaching them and what the end goal ultimately is. So we're talking about the church. And then even normative behaviors. When we talk about normative behaviors, we're talking about either mores or folkways. Acceptable behavior legally or codified are mores. What is allowed in terms of behavior? So I drive down here and I want to know if the rules are different. But I'm driving my motorcycle out here by one of the malls and I'm coming up to a red light. But the red light isn't red yet. It's yellow. Kind of a shade of orange leaning towards red. What do I do with my motorcycle? What do you guys do with your motorcycles? Full on gas. You go ahead and hit that gas pedal. Now, the government would say running through a red light, because at this point, you've seen it from a distance, you've seen that it turned yellow, orange, red, and you hit the gas, and so you're now going through it at a red light. The government says that this is unacceptable behavior. That's going to be the more, the actual codified rules. You shall not. And it may be through the church, it may be through the government, it may be through the school. I tell my students before every quiz, if you get caught cheating, you will fail the assignment, you will fail the course, and I may ask that you are removed from the university. Every exam, every quiz, I remind them. The university doesn't have to listen to me, but I could, if it's repeated, ask the university to throw this person out. Those are codified rules. After 7 or 8 classes, all my students know that rule from Mr. Moore. That's how you fail. And so the colonists will set up these codified rules that say, this is okay behavior, this is not okay behavior. If you are black or dark-skinned, this is okay, but if you do this behavior, if you do something else, I'm going to throw you in jail. We codify. We say, here are the rules. And those rules are probably going to be very different than the pre-colonial rules. The people who follow the rules are rewarded. The people who don't follow the rules are punished. Those are mores. Those are normative behaviors that are codified, that are written down somewhere, that we can say this is right or this is wrong. But in that example of the yellow light, there are folkways, right? There are acceptable behaviors. So you get to that yellow light, and it's 2 in the morning, and you can see in all directions, there's not a car coming. And you know what? You really shouldn't have had that second Coca-Cola a little while ago, because you're kind of in a hurry to go somewhere. Okay? And so you see that it's a yellow light turning red, nobody's around, you speed through it. Somebody's standing on the edge of the street, some little kid at 2 in the morning with an ohm tele-let ohms. And he's standing there on the side of the road and he looks at you. He's probably not going to judge you. He's probably not going to go and say, oh, bad person, because you ran through a yellow light when no one was coming. I don't want to gross you out, and I won't get into too many details. But you guys have different rules than we do, than the Americans do, when it comes to picking your nose, or blowing your nose, or even coughing. There's nothing in the law that I know of. The English department's on Lantai, Lima, the law department's in Lantai and Pai. And so we're right near each other. As far as I know, talking to my law friends in the floor beneath us at Ukaswe, there's no law that says you may not pick your nose. Right? Culturally in America, absolutely unacceptable. Not illegal, but something you wouldn't do. Blowing your nose in a classroom like this, taking a Kleenex and making it really loud, maybe kind of frowned upon, but not at all unacceptable. As long as you're using a Kleenex, as long as you're not just going off to the side, as long as you're using a Kleenex, it's acceptable. The folkways that we have, the rules that we have, there's nothing in the law that says you must take off your shoes before entering somebody's house. But in America, you want to take your stinky feet and walk on my nice carpets with your stinky feet. But I come to Indonesia, you want to bring all of that dirt from the outside on your shoes into my house? Really? So we've got this different perspective. Good, and I use that in quotes, good, colonial control establishes the norms. Good colonial control begins to say that there is a right way and there is a wrong way to do it. And so you start thinking that way. If you start emulating the British mores, you won't get in trouble. But if you start emulating the British folk ways, those informal, not written down rules of personal conduct, that's where you start moving along through culture. And that's also what you start passing down to your children. It's no longer you're going to do this and you get in trouble, or you're going to do this and get rewarded, but this is just who we are as a family. My son was born in America, but spent his first few years in Africa. My daughter was born in America, but spent all 6 years of her life here in Indonesia. And so what we've taught them about taking off their shoes comes naturally. You walk into a person's house, naturally you take off your shoes. You don't drink from the water in the spigot. You only drink purified water. You only drink good, clean water. They go back to America and their first response is to take off their shoes when they walk into a building. When we say, just get a glass of water from the sink, they say, what? Oh yeah, that's right, never mind, it's clean, it's okay. So you start conditioning people so that they begin to think like the culture that they're living in. And if that's a culture that's controlled by the British, then they're going to start thinking like the British. The stick becomes a lot less required in order to maintain control if already Africans are viewing themselves not as those kind of Africans, but as civilized Africans. After working in the desert for 3 or 4 months in the summer of 1997, washing my clothes in the river, sweating, but getting to know the people of northern Kenya, getting to know the Turkana people and the tribe that I lived with, getting to understand them as human beings, understanding that nudity was not somehow dirty, nudity was not somehow anti-Christian, nudity was practical, because when it's 40 degrees out, you're sweating a lot, and anything to keep the heat off you is a good idea. Coming down from Turkana to Nairobi, to the civilized world. Imagine somebody spending most of their lives in Papua and coming to Jakarta. And what we saw was a very similar experience. We would come down to Nairobi, have an ice cold Coca-Cola in a glass bottle, and when you've been sweating for an entire summer, you understand how valuable that is. And telling people where we're at. The waitress at the restaurant gives us our Coca-Cola and says, tell me about it. Where have you been? Because we clearly looked tired. We clearly looked like we were more than just tourists, that we'd been doing something exhausting. I think I lost 20 kilos that summer. And I was a smaller guy to begin with then. Now if I lost 20 kilos, my doctor would say, great, let's do 20 more. But back then I was still a lightweight guy. I was a college student. I was young and healthy. And clearly we looked exhausted. But she asked us about where were you, so what have you been doing here in Kenya? We said, oh, we lived up in Turkana. We lived up north of Eldoret. And they said, you lived with the naked people? You ate and you lived and you slept in a hut? Oh, no, I could never do that. The people of Nairobi are civilized Africans. The people out in Turkana, or in the Poka country, or in the Kikuyu, who Ngugi wa Thiong'o talks about in his works, those are primitive peoples. Those are people who are not like us. And that waitress, even though she had a job that most people would consider pretty menial, pretty basic, she still viewed herself as different than those that didn't follow the cultural norms that were established by the British. The British effectively segregated the people that they subjugated between those who follow us and those who don't. The colonizers shape identity. This is what a lot of you may be talking about when you do your writing as well. I promise that you guys are going to get breaks, and I promise that these ideas are going to come to you, but eventually it's going to get exhausting. So I'll try to keep it a little interesting. I know that these straight lectures, I don't do a lot with visuals. I should do something with bells and whistles to keep you entertained. But really, we're going to be focusing on these big ideas. But I want you to think about this one. Narrative framing. Narrative framing is deciding what stories we're going to tell and how we're going to tell them. You're English majors. You know that any good essay, especially any good, let's just do an introductory paragraph. Any good introductory paragraph must, do you guys know some of these rules? You must have a thesis statement, right?
Yes.
You've got to have a thesis statement. And a thesis statement, the way that I teach my students at least, a thesis statement should identify your topic, should narrow your topic, should also act as a hook or an attraction to the people. So you've got to do that to have a good introductory paragraph. You've got to have a good focus on what the topic is, how it's narrowed, and how to grab the attention of the reader. You've got to do that. You've got to have if we move past your first paragraph, you've got to have supporting paragraphs. And each of those supporting paragraphs must be relevant to your thesis statement. They need to refer back to that thesis statement. So point 1, point 2, and every good essay has 3 points. Right? Your concluding paragraph should provide summary, should go ahead and also provide what I talk about as impact. You need a thud sentence. You need a statement that you want to echo in the ears of the reader. That's how you write a good essay. If you don't write it that way, you're not writing a good essay. A story has an introduction, a body, and a conclusion. We graph it. We can talk about the rise in action. We can talk about the climax. If we want to be French, we can use the word denouement for the falling action, right? We talk about the denouement at the end. And then you may or may not have a solid conclusion. It may be, and she lived happily ever after, or maybe something else. That's how you tell a good story. But both the paragraphing idea and the story idea are culturally contextualized by a very Western perspective. The techniques that we use and the values that we have shape the narrative. Every story has to have a point. You go back to Aesop's fables, and there is a moral message to the story. You know what? Not every story has a point. Not every story has a clear outcome message. There's an American author by the name of Tim O'Brien. And Tim O'Brien writes a lot of great war stories. But one of the stories that he told was from a book called The Things They Carried. And in The Things They Carried, he talks about how to tell a true war story. He talks about the fact that true war stories are never true. Because unlike the Western perspective, even though he's a Western writer, we're conditioned to believe that we have to have this point to it. But in reality, when things happen to us, we can't always point out, this is clearly for God's will. This is going to make you a better person. This is going to shape who you are. This is going to teach you a lesson about life. Sometimes, bad things happen because bad things happen. But the Western perspective is that we need a clear point. And so the narrative, when the British came to the New World, the British came to the New World to follow God's path. They came to the New World to civilize the Indians. We are going to save the spiritual souls of the Indians. That's why we're there. That's the purpose. When we come to Indonesia from Holland, when we come to Indonesia from the West, we come to Indonesia to make this a better place. That's a great idea. And you tell that to somebody who disagrees with British rule, or Dutch rule, or Italian rule, who's sitting in a prison cell, starving to death, being picked on by the rats and the lice. And you say, look, you're being civilized. Look at all the great things that the Western powers are bringing you. The colonizers control the narrative. They not only tell you what the story is, but they tell you the right way to tell the story. And so we do that through the narrative framing, as well as that behavioral conditioning that I talked about before with the normative behaviors. But we established that this is the story that you need to be paying attention to. So if you're talking about colonialism, we have to talk about language too. We have to get into this idea that the most effective tool that anyone can use to colonize is language. It's a control. This may come off as stonewalling, and I hope it doesn't, because it's a reality. When a student comes into my room, I have control for a lot of different reasons. When a student comes to complain about a grade or say that this isn't fair, I've got a lot of control going on. I've got control because the university says I'm in charge, that I'm the docent, students should listen to me. I have a boss, Ibu Detta, and she's got more control than I do. She's shorter than I am, but she's certainly more powerful. The university has given her that control. But there's one area that I always have more control than the student. Because most of our discussion, being part of an English department, takes place using English. When I talk to a student using English, I don't have to translate anything. When I talk to a student using English, I can use idioms and metaphors. I can use American baseball sports metaphors, and now they're having to figure out what does the word literally mean, and how does baseball connect to me getting a bad grade in cross-cultural understanding. And so because of that, language has a great control. The British use this brilliantly. They set up their schools to say, listen, Gikuyu is a backwards language. Swahili is a language of the devil. Hoka and Turkana and all the other languages of Kenya, the 30-plus languages, primary languages within Kenya's borders, those are all backward and inferior. So if you want to be civilized, if you want to be cultured, you're going to speak in English. Frantz Fanon, great person to start looking at if you're interested in post-colonialism, to look at Frantz Fanon, The Wretched Earth, as well as a lot of other things regarding language and culture. The mastery of language affords remarkable power. If you've got language control, you have power. When I walk into a classroom and my students are speaking in Bahasa Indonesia, and I use a couple of words in Bahasa Indonesia, my Indonesian's really bad. But if I say, oh yes, I understand. If I go ahead and explain the fact that, yeah, I understand what you're saying, they immediately switch into Bahasa Jawa. Because they quickly realize the fact that, wait a minute, he's got power in English, but now we don't have power over him by using Bahasa Indonesia. With my kids, we first started speaking to my kids using English. But once they started picking up on English, we realized if we told secrets, if we wanted to talk about, should we have ice cream after lunch? We'd better use some other secret parent language. And so we used language like Tigrinya, the language of Northern Africa where we were living at the time. When we came to Indonesia, we started using Bahasa Indonesia, even our broken Indonesia. So we would go ahead and talk about, so after dinner, should we get some es cream? But es cream doesn't translate too far. And so that doesn't go too far away. Later on, my kids began to pick up enough that even if we were talking about, if we wanted to, oh, Saiharu's pretty good, Toko Basi. Even something like that, that's not a deep secret about, I need to go to the hardware store. That's what I said, right? Okay, just making sure. Okay, so even if I say something like that, my kids are picking up on that. And so we can't tell secrets. We can't talk about hadiah. We can't talk about, anda mau pergi ke gereja jam 7 atau jam 10 pagi. Even if we talk about that, they're going to start putting in their insight about the fact that, no, let's sleep in. We don't want to go to Indonesian church this morning. It's too early. We want to go to the SE, to the International Church instead, at 10 o'clock, our sleep-in church. So the language has power. You guys, my Central Java students, if you have English and Indonesian, and you have Korean or Mandarin, you have power. As an educated Indonesian, if you speak those languages fluently, if you can speak at least one other Asian language, English and Bahasa Indonesia, you can write your own ticket in a lot of ways. We have this huge Korean population in Salatiga. For being this, my students from Semarang would say that we're a desa. We're a small town. It's only got a couple 100,000 people. Nothing like Semarang or Jakarta. We're just a small town. But we've got a large Korean population. And that Korean population needs tutors for their kids. That Korean population, when they bring in friends and they bring in people from their companies, they need translators. And so we need all of this extra. Yeah, if you've got Korean in your background and English and Indonesian, if you could do some French, if you could do some Portuguese, if you can pull in a European language, wow, go anywhere in the world. Someone will hire you, especially if you can write a 5-paragraph essay. Because those things combined really are valuable skills. The mastery of the language affords remarkable power. For Ngugi and Achebe and the first real post-colonial educated generation to come out of Africa, it's interesting because Ngugi without English, or Chinua Achebe without English, would be seen as a really good African writer that no one outside of Africa has heard of. But it's English, the translation of their works and their own ability in English, that has allowed their ideas about post-colonialism to move beyond the border of their individual countries. Now, Frantz Fanon also talks about the fact that to choose a language is to choose a world. And this goes back to what I was talking about earlier with cultural engineering. That simply talking in a specific language says something about your cultural beliefs, values, and attitudes. Language carries culture with it. I don't know how many of you are from outside the city, but when my students go back to their villages, when the kids go back to Papua or Kalimantan, when the people even go up to Kopang, which is only a few minutes up the hill from us, and they start speaking in English, they either get one of two reactions. Either people are impressed because, wow, you're learning something, you're speaking English. Or two, you're speaking English and you're not one of us anymore. Do you guys get that? At all? That there's that negative reaction about the fact that, oh, you think you're too good to be Indonesian. Oh, you think that you're better than us. Oh, you decided you want to be, oh, you get the skin whitening cream on you. You smaller Indonesian guys, you're going to have to pump up the muscles a little bit, so you're going to go ahead and take the powder that makes you look more Western, more muscular Western. You don't want to look too K-pop, right? The guys so you guys start choosing a language, even if you're speaking in Korean. Even if you start throwing around Korean words, that's choosing a perspective. That's choosing a world. If you don't believe me, let's start talking about some examples like polisi tidur. When I moved to Indonesia, one of my favorite expressions in Indonesian was polisi tidur. Not just because I'm always on my motorbike and like you guys going up to the yellow light, when I see a polisi tidur, my reaction is go faster. See if you can hit it. Forget about the shocks, who needs the tires, those can be fixed. There's always a tumble bond someplace. Hit that thing higher. So you got the sleeping policeman, what we would call a speed bump. Speed bump to slow down your speed. It's supposed to make you go slower, not faster. But unless one of my kids is on the back of my motorbike, I'm probably going to hit that thing faster and see what kind of altitude I can reach. But let's talk about what that means though. Because I understand what the denotation, what the dictionary definition of that word really is. That we're talking about a device meant to slow down a vehicle from going too fast. A bump in the road to do so, right? But the fact that Indonesians choose the term polisi tidur, it communicates something about policemen. Doesn't it?
Yes.
What does it say about policemen? Are policemen valuable? Are policemen important? according to that term alone, are policemen important? No. They're in the way, right? They're simply interrupting your speed, right? Are policemen hardworking? No. They're sleeping in the road. Do you care about policemen? You don't even care about policemen, right? And so when we're dealing with Polisi Tidur, that's carrying cultural beliefs, values, and attitudes with it. The foundation of culture. In the English language, when we choose to use English and we talk about someone who is promiscuous, this will make some of you blush. When we talk about someone who sleeps around, who has many partners, think about how many words we have in the English language for a man who sleeps around. And are those positive or are those negative? Normally for a man who sleeps around, are they negative? He's a player. He's a stud. He's a playboy. He's a ladies' man, right? He's a ladies' man. So we've got, he's a lady killer. All of those terms that we've got kicking around for a man who sleeps around, it says something about how we value sexuality in the English culture, in the American culture. It's a positive thing. It shows masculinity, it shows strength, it shows what a man is supposed to be. All those are positive. Use the same application but for women. A woman who sleeps around, I'm going to keep my language careful right now. But a woman who sleeps around is a tramp, is a prostitute. On our university campus at one of my schools, they use the term community pillow because she slept in a different bed every night. She was shared by those kind of ideas that you've got. What is it? Chabe? Is that a positive term? No. If you're a woman, do you want your sister to be called that? No, absolutely not. Do you mind if your brother is called a player or a stud? No. If you've got good character, maybe you should still have a problem with that. But we don't view that as a negative thing. The words that we use carry connotations to them. And they say something about what our culture really is. And so when you start talking about choosing languages and forcing people into choosing languages, it says something about what's important to them. Under Ethiopian rule, in the country of Eritrea, it was illegal to use the local language of Tigrinya. You needed to use the Ethiopian language. You had to. When Ethiopia was controlling Eritrea, it was required. You had to listen to it. Absolutely banned. You'd be thrown in jail if you were caught speaking one of Tigrinya or one of the other 2 or 3 major languages that's just spoken in that region. After independence, when Eritrea earned their independence 20 some odd years ago, they banned Ethiopian. They said, absolutely you can't speak Ethiopian. But the problem was, we're talking about a 60-year gap. Post-World War II, Ethiopia was given Eritrea. So World War II, Italians got kicked out. What should we do with this country, area called Eritrea? We'll give it to Haile Selassie in Ethiopia. But for 60 years, you weren't allowed to speak Tigrinya. Tigrinya was not allowed to evolve. Tigrinya was not allowed to grow. The only people who were speaking Tigrinyan, the language of the people, were the rebels who were fighting a war against the Ethiopians, covertly, living in caves, living in ditches, secretly attacking the Ethiopians wherever they could. So, Tigrinya became very good for a language to talk about bombs, and to talk about wounds, and to talk about injuries. That's where the language of Tigrinya began to evolve. Is they had these great words for sucking chest wound. How do you describe somebody who's got their heart exposed because of a blast from a bomb? They had words for those. They had lots of different words for injuries. What they didn't have words for were words like compassion, beyond a simplistic version of it. They didn't have words for modern technologies, because those modern technologies were never part of living the rebel lifestyle. And so for many current Eritreans, it's difficult to describe, using their own language, what they're feeling about the government, what they're feeling about relationship. To try to find a transcultural descriptor in Tigrinya would be almost impossible, because that language has not been allowed to change. It affects the way that they view the world, and it affects their outlook. And so when Franz Fanon talks about to choose a language is to choose the world, what we've really got here is a Sapir-Whorf hypothesis. That's a bad typo, sorry. It's W-H-O-R-F, Sapir-Whorf hypothesis. The Sapir-Whorf hypothesis says exactly what I just said. We create reality with the words we use. My pet name for my son is 12 years old. The name that I give my son when I'm talking to him intimately, when I'm talking to him about being a man, I refer to him as Ambassa. And Ambassa is an African word for lion. It'd be equivalent to the word Simba in Swahili, if you guys know Lion King. So we've got, yeah, that's how most people know their Swahili. Hakuna Matata. Yeah, go ahead. Yeah, you guys already speak Swahili. You are multilingual. But Ambassa goes beyond that idea. Ambassa is beyond just the word lion. Ambassa is a word that you use to complement a man's intelligence, to complement a man's bravery, and to complement a man's strength. And that's shaped my son's perspective on what it means to be a man. My son is very soft-spoken. He's very quiet. He's got one of the best emotional intelligences that I've ever seen about understanding people. But one of the things I stress to him is about a man's job, partially, is to be brave even when he doesn't want to be. To be strong even when he doesn't have the strength. To be confident even when he's scared to death. And that says something about him. But when you see my daughter with her curly blonde hair and her desire to wear pink and purple at all times, the first reaction that people give to my daughter is, "Oh, Luchu. Oh, so cute. Oh, cool." You gotta pinch those cheeks. But what she's being told by those word choices is that what's important for a little girl, what's important for a woman, is to be pretty and to be cute, to be adorable. I go through therapy every 6 months, or every 14 weeks. My therapy is at the end of the semester, when I'm done with getting my picture taken, when I'm done having to teach you guys or whoever I'm teaching, I shave my head. Because I know nobody cares if I'm bald or not. My wife is nice that way. She loves me and she'll put up with my short hair. So I shave my head and it's therapeutic. It's a little bit like a baptism. Okay, that semester is gone. Okay, I'm just gonna watch it. And I always talk to my daughter about, we can do that with you. If you wanted to, we could shave your head. She's got these long curls that are about down to here. And I said, we can cut them down to here, but we could shave your head and you'd still be important. You'd still be valuable. You'd still be beautiful. You'd still be intelligent. That wouldn't take it away from that. But because of the way that language works and the reality that it constructs, she knows Luchu is more important. She knows pretty is more important. Compliment a little boy. How do you compliment a little boy? You don't usually, unless he's wearing a bow tie, unless he's wearing a special batik, you normally don't talk to little boys about, oh, what a great outfit you're wearing. You may say cute, but quickly you're going to move to, aren't you a big boy? Aren't you strong? Aren't you, yeah. And you're complimenting his physicalness, his strength. But for little girls, you're always complimenting their beauty and their appearances. The Sapir-Whorf hypothesis for cultural understanding, and specifically with post-colonialism, is essential because you start thinking in that reality. If you start thinking in English, you're going to hear words differently than when you start thinking in Indonesian. When I teach cross-cultural understanding, the barrier that I give students between first language and second language and third language. How do you know that something has become a second language rather than a foreign language? Do you dream in that language? if you guys are second language English speakers, and you've really become so fluent in it, then some of your dreams are going to be in English. What is your heart language? What language, when you get really scared and you need to, or hopefully you're praying more than when you're really scared, but when you're really desperate and you're praying out and you're really just like, I am lost and I need help, what language do you pray in? Do you speak in Indonesian to God? Oh, because the British would say he doesn't understand it. Because he only understands English, right? I mean, King James Bible, that's what the Word of God was written. Oh wait, no, that's not what the Word of God was written in. Let's make sure that that's clear for the camera, that I don't think that the Word of God was written in King James English. But the way that we view God, think about how even your language shapes the way that you view your spiritual relationship with the Creator of the universe. And be it Allah, or be it Jesus, or be it God, or be it some Hindu belief or some other spiritual perspective. The way that the language that we use and the words that we choose to describe affect the way that we see the Almighty. The word Abba, there's no other translation for the word Abba. 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 Biblically speaking, when we talk about Abba, A-B-B-A, Abba, is a way to describe Father.
Yes.
But it's got a different connotation than Father. If you talk about your father, got a little formality there, right? If you talk about Dad, we drop the formality. If you use the word Abba, we're really getting into Daddy. We're getting into an intimacy. We're getting into a connectedness. And so, using this just as a simple example, not as a theological prompt to convert anybody. When Christ is on the cross and he calls out in desperation, he doesn't use the word translated to Father. He uses the word translated to Daddy. There's an intimacy connected there. We're creating reality by the words that we use. Our perceptions about what's important, our perceptions about our roles in the universe, all interconnect to this idea of the language that we're using. We're going to get more into that this afternoon to talk about how language controls things. But that's an easy way to determine an insider from an outsider. People who speak your language. And it can be slang. It can be gaul. Gaul, right? It can be gaul. This is a way to decide who's part of your club and who's not. If you're a colonized people and you don't speak the language of the colonizers, you don't have power. You don't have position. You're not going to be favored among. But if you have the language, you now have the ability to connect to that culture and benefit from that oppressing culture itself. So colonizers use language as a major tool to go ahead and shape the reality of our colonization. So when we talk about these ideas, that's what we've got. When we're talking about writing about post-colonialism, I'm bringing out these highlighted elements about what is the colonizer, because if you're going to talk about it from a post-colonial perspective, these are some of the themes that you're addressing. You're addressing the exploitation of resources, about how is it that the colonizer takes advantage of the people, either through their resources. They take the good land for themselves. The best wineries in Africa from the Italians are located on the best pieces of land. The best government buildings are located in the most prominent spots. And they will take it from the farmers, or they will take it from the lot owners, or they will take it from the storekeepers. They will exploit the resources. The best and the brightest, the people who are most willing to come alongside the colonizers, those are the people that they're going to be taken first and foremost. For the slaves, who do you take for a slave? You take the strongest. You take the most powerful. If you're talking about African slaves and slave traders to the US, you're looking for women who have large breasts and large hips so that they can give birth. So that they can be the ones most likely, at the time, that was the mentality, is that they've got large birthing hips. They're going to be able to provide more slaves later on. You want the strong men. You want the men who can carry a lot of weight, who can do a lot of work, who are going to make it through heavy winters, or not get disease, or not get sick. And you're going to treat the physical resources like property. You're going to treat the people like property. Even if it's not through direct slavery. How is it that Indonesia saw its people and its land exploited? We could start walking through the cultural manipulation. How is it the church has shaped your perspective on your roles? How is it that education has shaped about what's important and what's not? You guys have been buying a lie for a long time. Grammar is important. Right? We keep telling you that. We tell you that over and over again. And this is how I don't get invited back to Jakarta. We keep telling English students that grammar is important. You've got to know a dangling modifier. You've got to know what a gerund is. You've got to know all these things. It is. It's important. But one of the things that we've been stressing is this cultural value, that this is what matters. And all your teachers do it. We all do. We have certain pet projects. We've got certain ideas. I believe in the communication process. Other teachers believe in grammar. But we go ahead, our educational system says things about your behavior. The way that we condition you in the government, the way that we condition you in the schools, the way that we condition you in everyday culture is how we address these issues. What about the language issue? Have you had teachers who have said no Bahasa in the classroom? Have you had English teachers who have said that? What does that say about their values? What does it say about what's important? It may say, right now, what's important is English. But it may also be saying something else about that your Indonesian is less important than your English. I didn't ask for the survey, but I think I probably will the next time I give this kind of conference. How many other languages do you speak? And are they acceptable? If you're speaking a Batak, if you're speaking a Papuan dialect, if you're speaking Javanese, if you're speaking Mandarin, are those all viewed equally acceptable? And if they're not, that's one of the things you may end up writing about. Talking about in the way that you feel that some aspect of your culture has been conditioned into you to feel inferior, or dirty, or wrong, or unacceptable. So that's kind of where we're moving to with these ideas. Language is fun to play with. Get into the theory. Sapir-Whorf, not or. Yeah, sorry, that's a bad typo. Who are? Sapir-Whorf, sometimes it's hyphenated. Sapir-Whorf is a great idea. Start looking at somebody like Franz Fanon and the Wretched Earth and start talking about him. I'll be throwing out more names and more theories as we go on today. But find the theory or the idea or the author that you start connecting to and start playing with it. I know that lunch will be coming pretty soon. I've asked, since I know some of you will be coming and going and some of you may just be asleep by the end of this, I've asked to be able to go ahead and provide some time for questions between each session too. Do you have questions or comments about what we've talked about, so what I've talked about, and you guys have head nodded to this morning? I know we covered a lot of ground, and I know I am a fast talker. My father is a lawyer, my brother is a lawyer. Whenever one of us would bring someone home to a dinner, we'd bring a girl home for the big important to meet the parents. My mom would inevitably lean over to the young lady and say, "This is what happens when you marry a lawyer. You end up with lots of little lawyers." In my house, you don't get heard if you don't talk fast. So we're always going at it. So I apologize if that's too quickly for some of these ideas. But what are you guys thinking about these? Are there questions? Is anybody going to be brave, or everybody going to be mum? Anything that you're not, that's okay. I get that that's an itch, not a raise your hand. Anything that you guys are not sure about? Or, there are a lot of places to start. I don't know if you can track down a good copy of it, but looking at Ngugi's children's literature is really interesting. Ngugi, Ngugi wa Thiong'o. But his Njambanene stories are a really good place to start. Looking at books that are written for African children about post-colonialism or about colonial powers. It's a neat way to do it. That's the reason I wrote my scriptsy on the children's lit, because all of the ideas in the adult books of Achebe and Ngugi and Soyinka and others, you can find in a lot of these children's books if you look deep into them. You know, we're covering a lot of hard, big ideas. It's fast. And later on, I'll give you guys my email address. I don't ever reject a question from a student through email. Sometimes I don't know the answer and I'll say so. But between my imperfect Indonesian and your maybe not quite perfect English, we can communicate. And so I want to make sure that you guys understand that. So if you guys are malu, and don't want to do it in front of me, you don't want to ask anything in front of everybody else, that's fine. But catch me also at lunch. Catch me after, between sessions, as you're processing these ideas, as you're Googling them, or things like that. We can talk about things later on too. Any questions about this? Yes. Hey, oh, Pak Jomo, by the way. Jonathan, Jonathan Moore, Jomo. Sorry. When Jomo Kenyatta was a former president of Kenya, it also makes me feel a little more Indonesian to have something other than Jonathan. Jomo, not Jomo. So, yeah. Okay. But Joe, okay, I was John when I was But I've been Jomo I've been Jonathan for a while. I was Jonathan where they didn't speak with a J or a TH sound in Africa, so I was Jonathan there, and I'm Jomo here. I've been that guy.
He calls Jomo.
All right, your question here in the back.
My name is Maka, so I would like to ask you, in your opinion, what do you think about how the colonists think that the Asian and the African countries have to be civilized? And then, just because their culture is different, so what makes the Europeans' culture is better than us?
That's one. I want to make sure we're contextualizing this, that we're putting it in the right context. First of all, I don't think that many people would say that now. There are pockets. There's racism going on in the world. Some of it was a pretty deliberate excuse. We talk about dehumanizing the enemy. Now, if you are a person, and I'm a person, I can't own you, right? But if you are a brown-skinned, if you are the term that was used during the Vietnam War by American soldiers were gooks. The term chinks for Chinese. There are a lot of negative, N-I-G-G-E-R, such a strong word, I don't even say it. But if you take these terms and you dehumanize someone and you decide to take their land, tidak apa-apa. If you decide that you are going to take their lives, tidak apa-apa. If you decide to take their wives, tidak apa-apa. It's not a person that you're dealing with anymore. If you acknowledge that this is a human being, if you acknowledge that this person's an equal, you don't treat them that way. And so some of it was an excuse. Some of it also gets into basic xenophobia. I don't know if you know that word. Xenophobic. Yeah, xenophobic or xenophobia. Fear of the other, or fear of strange things, fear of the outsiders. We have a natural questioning of someone that we don't know or don't understand. You guys look different than me. That's weird. Because clearly, if I'm doing it, it must be right. If you're not doing what I'm doing, you must be wrong. Right? Because otherwise, so if it's dealing with personal scarring, we look at that and say, only a monster would intentionally, scar their skin. That's different, and clearly it's wrong. That only somebody like that would behave in that way. Multiple wives? Oh no, only animals have multiple wives. That's not something we would do. You justify your action through xenophobia by saying they're not like us and therefore We have reason. We are helping you by showing you the right way to use your land, which you should be raising nutmeg, and you should be raising spices. You should be using rubber trees or palm oil. That's the right way to use your land. It's not to live within the jungle and only get the food that you actually need at the time that you need it. Yeah, it's hard to say that, to justify while it's happening. I think you could probably ask the same question, and this is going to get me in trouble. You could also ask the same question about people when we look at homosexuals, when we look at transsexuals, when we look at virtually anybody who fits an other category than me. In my family, I have, and I'm almost ashamed to admit this, I have a sister-in-law, she's a math professor. She studies mathematics. She thinks that mathematics is important. How weird, how ridiculous, how messed up is that? We know that right and wrong answers, that's silly. The real value is talking. The real value is communicating, right? That's English major perspective. So we look at the other, we look at the different, and we say that that's wrong. I joke with my kids about the fact that I will probably still love them if they become engineers or scientists. I will probably still love them. But that's, I mean, it's our values. My values must be right, otherwise I wouldn't have them. My beliefs must be right, otherwise I wouldn't have them. My values must be right, otherwise I wouldn't have them. The way that I act must be right, otherwise I would act differently. And since you act different from me, you're clearly wrong. Did that kind of answer your question? It's a lot of justification. We can talk about the profit motive. That you could look at Marxist perspective or somebody like Hofstede who talks a lot about cultural identity. And some of it is in terms of establishing control and positions of power. You can be, Kurt Vonnegut Jr. is an American science fiction writer, kind of does some weird stuff. He's got a book called Cat's Cradle. And Cat's Cradle is a great post-colonial story because one of the things it talks about is two white guys landing on an island, and when they land on an island together, one decides to be the political leader and the other decides to become the religious leader. And together they work against each other, they're almost frenemies. If you guys know that pop culture term. They're enemies in public, but really they're friends. They're kind of working together. And so they manipulate the people so that one is providing political guidance and the other one is providing religious guidance against the politics. And so finding power where you can grab power is part of the reason too. If you can't find power in England, go somewhere else and find power. If you can't be the big man there are all sorts of stories. Go to Singapore and learn about their history about raffles. And a lot of the guys that raffles had they were small, petty men. A lot of them were people who were exploiting the locals because they couldn't exploit the locals elsewhere. They wouldn't have been taken seriously in England. They wouldn't have had a position of power in traditional European government. But when they go to Asia, they can suddenly wield power. And they can do things they would never be allowed to do in England to these people because they're not real people. Because they're somehow inferior. Anybody else? We got lunch soon, right? Kidda. 12 o'clock. Okay, great. So that gives me 12 minutes to do the next activity. My students know to get worried when I start making that face. Because I talk a lot about power and I talk a lot about control and things like that, it's always kind of a weird feeling because I'm talking to you about colonization and about manipulation and being manipulated by the white oppressors. So I'm going to make you do something that makes you feel uncomfortable that you don't want to do. Okay, I've got an activity for you over lunch. We are going to have lunch in Yakrut. Yakrut is a fictional country that I picked this activity up probably about 20 years ago, in which I got to participate in it. and I've been using it ever since. Yakrut was the country that was made up for this activity. It's just Turkey spelled backwards, and so its national symbol is right there. Turkey. Turkey. Yeah. Dinner at Yakrut. Yeah, lunch at Yakrut. All right, I'm going to ask you guys to do some things that are going to make you feel a little bit uncomfortable, but I promise are not illegal in any way, shape, or form, that they're not going to send you to hell, you're not going to get expelled for them, you're just going to need to be brave a little bit. During lunch, what I'm going to do for you, or do with you, is you're each going to have an identity. The directions. You guys are going to come to Yakrut, and you're going to get your regular kind of food box if you're eating with us, and if not, that's okay too. You can still participate in other ways. But when you're having your meal, I want you to be assigned a specific role to play when you eat. And your role is here, so your directions are going to be on this card. The way for this to really work well, and this is hard for anybody, but for Indonesians especially, the way for this to work well is for you not to show your card to anyone else. If you don't understand this, come to the front of the room. If you don't understand what's on your card, come to the front of the room and I'll quietly explain it, or some of the guys have a little bit of an understanding of it as well. Come to the front of the room if you need questions answered. But otherwise, you've got your card and your directions. Follow the directions while you eat. Some cultural guidelines for Yakrut that everyone needs to follow. Yakrut is a country that's very polite, but will never talk about what their culture is. All right? So the most rude thing you can do during this dinner, and the only rule that I really want to make sure that no one violates, is during lunch, you don't ask anybody about what's on their card or about what they're doing and why they're doing it. So don't ask them about their cultural behavior. But we'll be divided into 3 different categories. The 3 categories that you will get divided into, and this will be pretty random, I've just been shuffling these up. You will either be an international observer. That's the easy one. If you're the international observer, the borders of Yakrut have just opened up. And so we've got these international observers who are coming in to explore the culture. If you're an international observer, your job is to look around. Your job is to watch. Your job is to simply see what's going on. Hang out in the culture. Pretty easy. Number 2, we have people from Yakrut. And so if you are a Yakrutian, you are a citizen of Yakrut, you have 3 rules that you need to follow when you're eating. So read those rules, make sure you kind of understand those rules, and do your best as you're eating, whatever else you're doing. Do your best to follow those 3 rules. Those are the customs of Yakrut for eating. For instance, one of the rules I had thought about doing, but I realized was going to cross a line, have you only eat with your left hand. And I know that in Indonesia you don't, so I don't do those kind of things. But it will be a habit, it will be a behavior or an action that you must do while you're eating your meal. All right? So you need to follow those 3 rules. Read through the 3 rules. If that's unclear, you can always talk to me. If you're an international observer and it's not clear, come and talk to me. The 3rd role that's going to be assigned as well is you are a Yakrutian immigrant. You are coming to Yakrut. Your job is to observe like the international observer. Except you're also trying to blend in. Because you're going to move to Yakrut, you would like to be seen as a Yakrutian. So while you're eating your meal, you need to be looking around for the cultural cues to see, how are the Yakrutians eating? Okay? You don't know who the Yakrutians are, though. So you need to kind of look around the room and observe your classmates and the people in this room and see if you can figure out how to eat as a Yakrutian would eat. All right, so those are the 3 rules. Do not, okay, so carefully read your card. You're going to be assigned your role. One of those 3 roles, don't talk about, oh, hey, I'm a Yakrutian, or hey, I'm an immigrant. Nope, don't show your card to your classmate. Read your own. If you don't understand, come talk to me. I'll kind of make sure you understand it. If you mess up the rules a little bit, tidak apa. Alright? You're not getting a grade for this. I promise I'm not going to report to you, Sylvia, about this. Nothing along those lines. So try your best. This is a game I've never done in Indonesia with students this way. I had students in my house and we played it before where they've had pizza at my house. So don't discuss with anybody else. You can come and ask one of us in the front about it and just enjoy your meal. When we get done with lunch and then we come back here, we'll walk through this activity and we'll play with the idea behind it. So, Mengerti, you'll be given a card. Do your best to follow the directions on the card. If you're not sure, ask on Neil and I. That's a not Jatang name. Ask one of us, and we'll try to explain it to you. So, yes, great. Big stand. Peek to see what you get. So you read through this, make sure you understand the rules. So like this. Okay, we're good? Comfortable doing it? Gonna be great? Okay. Yes. Again, if you are a Ukrainian, follow the guidelines about how you should eat. Don't tell anybody else. Don't show anybody else your card. If you are an immigrant, your goal is to imitate. Your goal is to eat the way that they're eating. But you don't know who's who. If you're the international observer, try to see if you can look around the room and see if you can figure out who is the immigrant, who are the other international observers. Can you identify the rules? As an international observer, when you're watching and you're eating your meal as you would normally eat, try to see what other people are doing and whether or not you can identify, oh, that person's clearly an immigrant, or that's an international observer, or these are the 3 rules. So do your best to try to explain them. So yeah, yeah. If anybody isn't sure about something, by all means give me a signal and I'll come to you. Yes, thank you. No, I think I need to switch it. Why? Because I do that. I count on things. Let's see what cards I've got. Hey, Sylvia. You seem like you're big. Figured. Eat as you guys would normally eat. Do whatever you want to do, but also try to find the guidelines. Drink. Drink, maybe. Drink so you can pass the glass. Next lunch. What do you want one of these? Oh, okay. Again, don't talk about the culture, remember? We can't talk about it. Are you joining us for lunch? Joining us for lunch? Get that. If you guys see anybody come in, by all means, I've got extra cards, and I'm not sure how well I distributed them.